Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, The Lazy Bookworm. For all those who do not know me, my name is Rebecca. I hope you are doing well. I hope the week has been good to you. And this video is all about what I read in July. I read quite a lot of books in July. It was a very productive month for me, reading wise. Now, this video is going to be in two parts. Next week's video is going to all be about what I read for Jane Austen July. I read, I think, about 5 books and I watched a movie. So I thought I would give that its very own video and I will put that up next week. This video is all about the other books I read in July. The sort of non-Jane Austen ones. I also want to say they are, by the way, also they are in no particular order. The first one I read is Labyrinths by Jean-Louis Bourget. I hope I've pronounced that right. If I haven't, I'm very sorry. Now, any of you who have read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's book, 100 Years of Solitude? No, 100 Years of Solitude. I think that's it. I know he wrote another one called Love in the Time of Carlo, which I've read. But anyone who's read Garcia Marquez will probably very much like Bourget. And Bourget, and for 2 reasons. One, like Marquez, he is from South America and he's from Argentina. He is from Argentina specifically, and also like Marquez, he very much is in the realm of magical realism. This book, Labyrinths, was essentially a collection of his short stories along with some of his essays. I think it's actually a really good introduction to Bourget, or Bourget. Again, I'm really sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've never read any of his work before, and yeah, I felt the book was really interesting. Some of the short stories were really interesting. I like the one, was it the Garden of Forking Paths, I think, and the Library of Babylon. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted. That's my cat going a little bit berserk there. Sorry. Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Jules Verne. I know I put this on my July TBR and I did read it. I also said in the same video that I'd read Around the World in 80 Days. And basically, if you read Around the World in 80 Days, you'd see in many ways this Journey to the Centre of the Earth is quite similar. It is basically about an eccentric man who decides to go on this sort of seemingly crazy and impossible adventure. This time to the centre of the earth. And like in Around the World in 80 Days, he also has an assistant with him. In this case is his nephew. And they go to Iceland, of all places, where they find a way to get to the centre of the earth. And once they get there, they find, like, I don't want to say another world, but they still find like different sights and sounds and also different creatures. One of which I thought was quite scary. I would definitely recommend, if you can, get the book that has illustrations. I really like the illustrations. Unfortunately, I cannot show you because it was a library book, but I really enjoyed it. The Clockwork River by J.S. Emery. This was also, I think, on my TBR for July, and I did manage to read it. If you saw that video, which I will link somewhere above here, you will know it was a chunky book. It was a doorstop. It was like about this thick. And it's basically about these 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, Bryony. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce my words today. Bryony and Sam, who sort of live their lives. They're sort of like a kind of old almost aristocratic like family. They're falling on hard times. And basically the story picks up when, well, the story for me really kind of picks up when Sam goes missing. And basically it has Bryony trying to find Sam, but it also details like Sam's adventures and his thoughts and all that sort of stuff. I like the book. It would be interesting to see if there's sort of like a sequel, or if the authors write another book. That's also another thing. Actually, the author is actually not one author, but two authors. I think they might be a brother and a sister, I think, but don't quote me on that. So I thought it was kind of interesting. It was written kind of technically by two people. The only criticism I would have probably is its length. I would think maybe it might have been better if it was split into two books. The next book I read was Christ Stop That Ebola by Carlo Levy. This book is a fiction book, but it was based on his own experience when he was banished to this sort of small village in, I think, the south of Italy, sort of during the fascist era. And basically is where our protagonist, he arrives at this village, and yeah, it's just about his time at this village and his sort of interactions with the people there. One of those villages where time stood still. You know, you felt that this was like how they'd been living for like years, if not centuries. I also read a book by Sylvia Townsend Warner called The Death of Don Juan. I'd never read any Sylvia Townsend Warner before, so this was my first. I have to say, I found this really hard to get into. I don't know whether it's a subject matter or just like the author's style of writing. I'm not really sure. I may read another book of hers. It was set in the aftermath of the death of like the famous sort of womanizer, romantic Don Juan, and sort of the fallout of his life. And yeah, because it followed this woman who knew Don Juan and whom he unsuccessfully tried to seduce. So it sort of looked at her and her husband and just all basically this sort of aristocratic family in this sort of village in Spain. Next, two books are by the same author, and they are both non-fiction, and they are first The Greek Myths and second Goodbye to All of That, and they're both by the English poet and novelist Robert Graves. The Greek Myths is a non-fiction work, and it's basically a kind of introduction to the Greek myths by Graves. I really liked it. I am a total newbie when it comes to Greek mythology, so I found it helpful. He also includes other myths as well, and some biblical myths. Focuses obviously on the Greek myths. The only thing I didn't quite like was the format of the book. It's done in a very, I'd say, encyclopedia dictionary style, with like sort of kind of entries on like different characters and things like that. And the second one is Goodbye to All That, and that is Graves's autobiography. It is his story about his childhood and his experience in the First World War. Graves was a poet, and he was known to be connected to the war poets, in particular Siegfried Sassoon, whom he mentions here. I really liked this book. I really liked it because I felt the world he was describing, particularly the pre-war world in England, is this whole world that doesn't really exist anymore. Maybe it exists in patches, but overall in many ways it seemed like a totally different world to me, so I thought that was quite interesting. I found his description of his experiences in war very so they were kind of emotional, but he sort of had an objective air to it, if that makes sense. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really good. Now, the last two books are probably my two favourite books of the month of July, and maybe the two favourite books I've read this year, especially the last one. And the first book is Ivan Turgenev's Father and Sons. It's basically a book about these two young men who go back to their fathers. The two young men were studying in the city, and they go back to their fathers in provincial Russia. And this is set during the 19th century, where there's a lot of kind of new ideas coming in, a lot of sort of turmoil and change. And it's basically about how a conflict arises between the two generations. I really liked it because I felt it was very relatable, because even though it was set in 19th century Russia, and about these two aristocratic families, I feel in many ways a sort of generational gap is still around today. And I also really liked it because Togenyev didn't really take a side. He didn't say, like, the sons were better than the fathers, or the fathers were better than the sons. He kind of each gave them their own due, which I really liked. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading more Togenyev. Yes. Well, last but certainly not least on my list is Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Everesto. This is a fiction book, and I first heard about this through Katie at Books and Things, and it sounded really interesting to me. I also read it because I wanted to read a book by Bernadine Everesto, because her name has just sort of been all over the place the last year and a half, especially in New Zealand, with her book Girl, Woman, Other and Manifesto. So with that in mind, I thought I would pick up Mr. Loverman. And I actually read this through audiobook, which I found really helped because you actually heard the characters speak, which I really liked. And the book is about this man, 75, I think, he's 75 years old, called Barry, who lives in London, in Hackney in particular, with his wife Carmel. He has two grown-up daughters and a best friend called Morris. Now, on the face of it, everything seems okay, just a normal sort of family, but we soon find out that for the last 50 or so years, Barry and Morris have been in a relationship together, unbeknownst to Barry's wife, Carmel. So this novel, which is told through Barry's perspective, there are some chapters which look at his there are some chapters that are kind of narrated by his wife, Carmel. But overall, the book is a first-person narrative, and this book is written in the first person, and it is Barry who is speaking to us. In a few chapters, Carmel speaks to us, but overall it is Barry who is speaking to us, the reader. And he talks to us about his life in Antigua, where he and Carmel came from, and Morris as well, and his life in London in the 70s and 80s in particular, and of course his relationship with Morris. The novel basically tracks Barry from his decision to finally tell Carmel the truth and divorce her and live with Morris, to his, basically he fluctuates a lot throughout the book about what to do. And yeah, so basically it is just his journey trying to figure out what to do about his relationship with Morris, what to do about his marriage, and also his reflections on his past, his family, his life in Antigua. Yeah, so I really, really love this book. It is probably my most, is definitely, no, I really, really love this book. It is definitely my most favourite in July. Ugh. I really, really love this book. It is the most favourite read I did in July. And I would probably say it is probably one of my most favourite books in 2022, if not the favouriteest book I read in this year. So, and it may be one of my favourites ever. So, basically, if I haven't told you, I've already told you that this is one of my new favourite books. I just love the character of Barry. He is what we would call a real lovable rogue. He's done a lot of bad things, and you could say the way he's treated Carmel's not that great, in some instances. But you just love him. I love his wit. He is so funny. So funny. There were times where I literally laughed out loud. I listened to this on audiobook, so there was literally times where I'd be listening to it and would just laugh out loud. It was just so funny. Even though it's a very poignant and very emotional story, it's also a very funny story. And that's just what I love about it. I also really like Moss. I feel Moss was sort of like the sort of steadfast, stable kind of character in this novel. You know, and, you know, all the other characters are great too, and yeah, I just couldn't recommend this book highly, highly enough. I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I can't wait to read more of Everesto's books because, yeah, this was amazing. So this was what I read in July, and next week, as I said, I will be giving a wrap up of what I read and watched, because I also watched the film, for Jane Austen July. I know it's a bit late, but hey, there you go. Hope you enjoyed this video. As always, remember to like or subscribe, and I will see you next week.